during the day 4, we're starting with a session called Lessons from Architecture and Urban Planning for Sustainable Resource Development and Vice Versa. The first panel will be moderated by Raziel. We'll have Robert McEwen on camera now, Hen, Jason, Felipe, and Ashley Morrison. Our second one of the day is Holistic Approaches, Integrated Strategic Planning and Sustainable Resource Development, followed by Greening Ahead, Architecture, Forestry, and Sustainable Development. On our next panel is On a Collision Course, Biodiversity, Diversification, and Sustainable Resource Development. And our last one, Site Rehabilitation and Closure in the Ages of Climate Change. Sorry, one more. Special panel, the Urban Prosperity Institute. One thing that we need to do as we begin this is a light acknowledgement. We are currently hosting this from Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And the Brock University acknowledges the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish and One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. So now I think it'll be great to invite our moderator for this session, and when Raziel returns, we'll get it going. But I would like each of you in the panel to introduce yourselves, give us a little rundown of where you're coming from, and then we'll start with the topic of the day. If you could, please. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rob McEwen. I am the chairman and chief owner of McEwen Mining. I started in the mining industry, built a company called Gold Corp, and then went and invested in a lot of juniors and created another company called McEwen Mining. And prior to that, I was in the investment industry and owned a member firm on the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Wonderful. And I think I'll go from my screen top right. So the next on my screen is Jason.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason McLennan. I'm an architect and urban planner, and I specialize in green building. You'll hear a bit more about that in a minute. And I'm originally from Ontario, but I live and work in Seattle, and delighted to be here and speaking with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you. Next on the list, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from Australia. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of a boutique circular economy consultancy called Corio, but I'm an environmental health scientist by background, and I've worked in deforestation, electronic waste, just to give you context about what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up, Felipe.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Felipe Correa. I'm an architect and an urban planner based in New York City. Here I have my practice, Somatic Collaborative, which primarily works at the intersection of architecture, urbanism, and infrastructure, looking at both sort of conventional design projects, but also larger scale applied research projects looking at the urban form and processes of urban formations in cities across the globe. In addition, I'm also the Vincent and Eleanor Shea Professor at the University of Virginia, and very much looking forward to sharing some of my work with all of you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm speaking from Israel right now. Actually, I was born in the lowest place on the planet, in the Dead Sea. I'm an architect. I worked in Toronto for a while as an architect and founded Alpha in 2010. Alpha is doing building science and lead and sustainable certification, working in projects in over 10 countries. And I'm also the chairman of the Israeli Green Building Council, which is now expanding its activity to other countries as well. Thank you.
I want to give the microphone to Rob McEwen, whom I found out a few days ago that his first vocation as a young man, as a teenager, was to become an architect, and then he lost his way and did a number of things in finance and mining, and yet he's continued to be a young and wonderful person who I've known for many years. So I'm going to give you the microphone, and you tell us how we ended up on this panel today, Rob.
as Razil said, I started life believing I was going to be an architect from age 7 to 17. That I knew exactly what I wanted to be. That was an architect. I guess in my last years of high school, I wasn't quite as diligent and I had to change plans. But I love good design and the impression and impact it makes when it's seen. But I didn't become an architect. I went on, I did an economics undergraduate, then an MBA, and went into finance. But many years afterwards, I was looking back on my career and I thought, I realized I never abandoned my true love of design and architecture because I was looking at it and said, only now I'm designing and constructing companies in the mining space. Okay, I looked at mining sites and they appear very utilitarian and very uninspiring buildings are sited there. So my first step was to ask, what should a building look like? I mean, should a mine site, should we try to camouflage it so that it blends into the background and no one can see it? Or should it become a jewel on the landscape, become an object that pleases the eye, not only of the beholder, but for those that it welcomes who work there? The previous company that I grew with the help of many was Goldcorp Inc. And I had the top 10 meters of our head frame. That's the shaft that takes you underground. It's about 100 meters in the air, but I had the top 10 meters painted in gold paint. Got a lot of resistance from our management team. And they said, why would you want to do that? And I said, well, I'd like to show what we produce, that's gold, and I wanted a sparkling point on the horizon that you saw all day long, especially at sunrise and sunset. Mining is my second career. As I said, I went into the financial industry doing research sales, portfolio management, corporate finance. And then at one point, after meeting a number of promoters and mine finders, I believe there are many more deposits to be found on Earth. And I decided to jump in and see if I could get into the jet stream. It's an industry that I think has provided many benefits to society. I think the industry is very generous to society. And it certainly provided me with the funds to contribute to society in ways that I believe will benefit not only Canadians, but people around the world by supporting medical research in the regenerative medicine and stem cell space, leadership programs in high school for boys and girls, architectural studies and entrepreneurial studies, and also supporting the arts. It's an industry that's ripe for innovation. It pays well. I expect, given the demographic trends, that anyone entering the industry will advance quickly through their career. If you enjoy travel, it's a global industry, and I encourage you to jump in. We need your energy, your passion, and your ideas. Thanks, Razil.
Wonderful. So this takes me to the next panelist, Jason McLennan, whom I'll ask him how he got involved with Rob, and I will also ask him if he could tell us the narrative as to his role in the Los Azules project. The photograph in the background is from Argentina, from the Los Azules project. Is one of the largest undeveloped copper deposits in the world. And we are developing it. Whittle Consulting, where I'm involved, is working on that. Jason is involved. Under Rob's leadership and vision, who brought Jason into the picture. So Jason, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, my friend. So once again, I'm Jason McLennan. I'm an architect and planner. And I've been getting involved in the mining industry more recently, again, thanks to Rob. My path is kind of the inverse, where I knew I wanted to be an architect and grew up in a mining town and was inspired by mining to think differently about environmental impacts, frankly. I grew up in Sudbury under the large smokestack that probably many of you know. and decided that I wanted to work on green buildings and architecture. And I essentially traveled around the world to learn cutting edge technologies and strategies, and started doing what we call living buildings, buildings that are truly good for the planet in many different places. It was that work that led me to meet Rob as part of the McEwen School of Architecture in Sudbury. So I went back to my hometown and met Rob, and we started talking about collaborating and bringing the principles of sustainability to the mining industry in all ways, in terms of impacts on energy and CO2 in the atmosphere, on toxins and water and waste and a whole bunch of issues. And so we've begun this journey together. And what I want to convey to everyone, to the students in the forum in particular, is that there are huge opportunities now to do things in a very different way. Not only mining camps and the mining buildings, but mining itself. And I think it's a very, very exciting time. I might share a couple slides if I can. So I'll keep this really quick because I want to make sure to pass on the baton here. So my firm, as I mentioned, we do work all over the world in all kinds of different settings, different climates, different building types. And we're bringing this experience now to the mining industry. And just some examples that might be interesting to the students is we do completely solar powered buildings, even in locations. This is one in Seattle that traditionally, doesn't get a lot of sun. We're able to power our buildings without fossil fuels, and we are also doing buildings that capture all the water that they need from rainfall and treat them in the buildings. This is the world's most energy efficient office building that we worked on in Seattle, and it really is the start of a new paradigm. So if you can do this for office buildings, you can do this for a lot of other things, and certainly from mining camps and mining infrastructure. And since we're speaking to a lot of folks from Ontario, I thought I'd make a hockey reference. I'm an old hockey player. Probably many of you played hockey. And I had the great opportunity to work on the world's greenest hockey arena, the new Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle for the Seattle Kraken. And this was a project that shows that you can take 18,000 people and bring them into an arena and get all the energy from renewable energy. And we even make our ice from rainwater that we collect. So it's the first NHL team that has rainwater for their ice, electric Zambonis. There's a ton of innovation, and this is just the beginning that we're bringing to the entire sports industry. So just to end now, so we can continue our discussion, a bit of inspiration for me in my career, as I've always worked to find mentors. Find people that are at the leading edge of your profession, your professors, people in industry, people like Rob, and follow your heart with what you believe in, and your career will be incredibly rewarding.
Jason, we'll come back later to the principles you elaborated and los azules of some of those ideas. But let me proceed. Hen, would you like to present your views on what you are doing? And then we'll have Felipe, and then we'll have Ashley.
Sure. So thank you, Raziel, and thank you, Jason, and all the other speakers. So we're Alpha, and a bunch of 20 professionals, I think highly motivated. Most of us are architects and engineers. And our vision is to work towards a sustainable built environment with zero use of resources. And this looked like science fiction, I think 10 years ago. And I think that we now understand that this is possible. But the opportunities are to create excellent built environments, so we can actually achieve more by using zero resources. Just a quick reminder what our context is. We're talking about limiting temperature rise by no more than 2 degrees Celsius, and try to limit them to 1.5. And in order to do that, we need to look at the biggest producer of carbon, which is the building sector for operation and construction, more than any other sector. And to achieve that 1.5 degrees Celsius, buildings will not produce carbon. So again, this is where we're going, and we're looking at a net zero balance on an annual basis. Buildings will be very efficient and will produce renewable energy, and the balance will be positive. And the global goals today are to reach this at 2030 for new buildings, and that's 7 years away. That's really around the block. And embodied carbon reduction of 40%. And by 2050, of course, all the existing buildings will have to be zero carbon. So how do you do that? The question, of course, is very complex. It's technological. There's a lot of engineering there, but I think you have to start with the human factor, and you have to look at sustainability in an integrated way. And for that, you need a process that really facilitates group thinking and collaboration. And I know that might seem like a cliche, but it's actually true. Because when we're talking about performance, we need that everyone will look at the opportunities, and this process was developed in order to get an understanding, a common understanding of the project's vision, of the goals, to look for opportunities to implement innovative ideas and opportunities to improve performance, and to look at actions that need to be made. So you can do this only when you look at it at a cross section. When you're talking about energy, it's the architect, it's the MEP, it's the mechanical, water, electricity, etc., etc. So it's a lot of disciplines that need to work together to achieve this very high performance. And this, I will just give 3 quick examples. From our perspective, it already brings some live examples. The first one is a kindergarten, which was built for larger than life children with cancer. So health was the primary concern, and it's the first building in Israel to achieve 4-star. It was built with really sustainable and passive solar in mind, and has a lot of unique PV production. And the first year of operation, we're already in a positive balance of energy. The next example, quick example, and I will finish in 2 minutes. So it's actually this existing building in the center of Israel, which is transformed to a whole unique and new, very technological building, while using the existing structure, which is very important to save carbon, and to integrate photovoltaics on the facades and roof that will offset the energy of the developer. And the building is nearly done now. It's toward occupancy, targeting LEED V4 Platinum, and it's actually a great building. Hope we can achieve this goal. The last project that I will briefly show is this kindergarten that has been operating now for 8 years. It was certified to the International Living Future Institute. Jason, I think that's your signature there. So they told us that this actually is the first kindergarten in the world. We're very proud. And it completed now 8 years in positive energy balance, which is great. But I just wanted to show the feedback. Eventually, it's all about people. And this is something that we got from the teacher of the kindergarten when we opened this kindergarten. And they're talking about health, they're talking about comfort, they're talking about really their well-being. And this is really maybe the most important thing, while again being at an energy balance of 0. So just to wrap up, so we are in a climate emergency. We need to remember that, especially young professionals who are going into the business. They need to understand that this is not just an ordinary time. We need to react to this climate emergency. we need to look at the integrated approach, look at the solutions that are in various aspects and various disciplines. And again, there are many, many opportunities, so make sure you're on board. Thank you.
Hen, thank you very much. Felipe, your own.
Thank you, Raziel. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Good afternoon, and I am delighted to be here today and be able to contribute to today's discussion from the fields of architecture and urbanism. For the first portion of the presentation, I would like to speak more broadly of the kind of work I do and how I got to get engaged with this kind of work, followed by a brief overview of the work related to resource extraction and urbanization that is perhaps more specific to the topic of the panel. Well, I have always wanted to be an architect, and a significant part of what I do is directly tied to a conventional design practice, i.e. buildings, furniture, etc. Another significant portion of my work, and one of my passions, involves examining cities, and in particular, working with the public and private sectors to rethink the role of infrastructure and public works in the context of contemporary urban life. I have always been fascinated with drawings and maps, and the roles these instruments play in visualizing and shaping our built environment. One of our earliest commissions in 2011 involved developing an urban vision for the implementation of a brand new underground metro in the city of Quito in Ecuador, and figuring out how a new single line in the Andes could serve as the backbone for urban development for the next 2 to 3 decades. This project focused on how investment in public works could serve as the backbone for new social and cultural services tied to mobility infrastructure, highlighting how important it is to think engineering and urban form simultaneously. This led to a similar project of a much greater scale, working with Ingenieros Civiles Asociados, ICA, in Mexico City, to evaluate how large urban tracts of land along the urban ring road, known as the Anillo Periférico, could be upgraded and rethought once their original use is no longer needed. Key to this project was to rethink how cities can migrate from monofunctional post-war mobility networks into infrastructure projects that are much better integrated into the fabric of the city. In the case of Sao Paulo, a more recent project, working with the Haddad Foundation, we were tasked with thinking how this metropolis, with the largest amount of inner-city post-industrial land in the world, could rethink new uses for this area, and in doing so, establish a new relationship between the city center and the forgotten Tietê River. In this case, an ambitious transfer of development rights process is intended to spearhead the recalibration of the area into a new residential mixed-use district, along with the ecological restoration of the river. A key lesson of this project involves bringing to the forefront how street networks and recreational open spaces need to also perform as passive stormwater drainage systems. If a lot of my work focuses on large metropolitan regions, yet I've always thought it is important to look beyond the city, no pun intended, and examine processes of urban formation outside of the consolidated city. It is in this book, Beyond the City, Resource Extraction Urbanism in South America, where I implement the term resource extraction urbanism to examine the cities produced and societies inscribed by extractive industries. A key case in point is the Oficina Salitrera Maria Elena, one of more than 200 nitrate extraction camps that created an unprecedented city network along the Atacama Desert, one of the most barren landscapes on Earth, linking Andean oases with port cities along the Pacific. Another case study looks at Villa Piloto and the cities that emerged from turning the lower Paraná River Basin into a hydroelectric Eden that would become the basis for Brazil's national electric grid and the source of energy that allowed the city of Sao Paulo to become the metropolis that it is today. Ultimately, the primary question all of these projects ask, specifically the ones associated with resource extraction, is how can these urban settlements survive once the resource that created them run out? While sites of extraction have a built-in expiration date, the settlements they produce are there to stay, opening important questions about issues of equity and economic sustainability on the long term. To conclude, perhaps the best piece of advice I can give all of you is primarily to be inquisitive, but more importantly, to find the right platform for your inquiries. In my case, I oscillate between teaching, applied research, and design projects. And for me, the ebb and flow between these platforms has provided a unique and productive way to see the world and contribute to it. Thank you.
Felipe, thank you very, very much. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Ashley and ask her to tell us who she is, how come she's on this panel, and how does she view the work of these three distinguished architects and what they're trying to do. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. Well, first of all, I mean, I really enjoyed all of those presentations, and we need all great minds around the world to come together to make the changes that are needed, because we are facing some serious challenges, and I think young people are very acutely aware of those. So being able to learn from people around the world is the privilege of, you know, platforms like this, panels such as this. So I'll also share some slides and set the context of what I do and how I think young people can really take part in, you know, being a part of this change that's required. So as I mentioned earlier, I am the CEO and co-founder alongside my lovely sister, running a boutique circular economy consultancy that has a very big mission. And that mission is to transform economies to serve people and nature. You might be asking why. Well, our Earth is a closed system, and what we have on Earth is all we have. There is no more. But today's economy is designed to grow on the extraction of Earth's resources. We call this economy linear. It has a take, make, waste model. It's built on mass extraction, for mass production, and mass consumption, all enabled by cheap fossil fuels. That is changing, which is brilliant. It's also enabled by cheap labor. And if you couldn't afford to buy all the things we produce en masse, we supply lots of cheap credit into the global economy. But what does this result in, and why does it really matter for us to change it? If I just look today at our environment, this diagram here, or this image you can see, is what we refer to as our planetary boundaries. These are the safe operating limits for people and other species to reside on our planet. There are 9 of them, and today we have transgressed 6. And one that's probably most common, or you hear most often spoken about, is climate change. So to call out some of the statistics also on the left-hand side, you know, by 2030, we're predicted to need 2 planets to sustain our current rate of consumption. Now we know that's not possible. And instead of seeing that as a negative, I see that as something to get curious about and get inspired. We've got a major challenge. How can we collectively solve it? Then if I zoom in on society, there's a big social aspect of this as well. For all of the wealth that we've created from the incredible ingenuity of human beings and the value that we can take from resources, that wealth hasn't been equally shared. 76% of it is owned by the richest 10% of people. Most of us are on that smaller slice of pie. But again, I look at this as an equation to rebalance, and that gets me really excited. So our future, it's not linear. So what is it? Our ultimate goal needs to be the regeneration of our planet and a sustainable society enabled by a new economic model, and the future economy is likely to be circular. So by definition, if you've never heard of the circular economy, it's a systemic approach to economic development that's designed to benefit business, society, and the environment. Now, there's no such thing as a silver bullet out there that's going to solve it all, but it is believed to be the best systemic framework we have to address the interconnected challenges of climate change, the biodiversity loss, social inequality. But guess what? We need to shift the way we think. Our mindsets need to change because we've only ever lived and operated in a linear economy and in linear business models. So this is again about rebalancing our mindsets and those scales, from profit to purpose, from controlling to empowering, from hierarchies to networks, from planning to experimentation, from privacy to transparency. And lastly, and I know my little sharing the screen is blocking it, but short-term thinking to legacy. It's very important. So I believe all young people can be a part of this and affect change. This is me. very young, a little bit of a toothless tiger there. But, you know, I always believed I could be anything that I put my mind to and that I worked hard to achieve. And, you know, you may go down many different paths, but I think Rob McEwen, when he started presenting today, he always came back to his first passion. And I think that's what's so important. We are most effective when we are doing something we truly and genuinely love and are very, very passionate about. And so if I very quickly wrap up my presentation about the journey that I've been on. So I went to university as a mature age student. I actually left high school and home when I was 14. Don't recommend it. I went the hard way. But I went back to university because my first passion was our natural world. I love it. I grew up on a big farm. And so I did environmental health science. I then lived and worked in Indonesia, protecting some of the rainforests there. But what I found in a lot of my work, they were Band-Aid solutions. They weren't focusing on the problem, which is our economic model, because no matter what I was doing, the destruction was happening faster than I could even do anything about. So I came back to Australia in 2017, and I had a very heartfelt conversation with my sister from our bedroom floor about wanting to try the concept of a circular economy. And she's like, circular what? She's like, what does that even mean? And I said, well, let's do something. And I was like, well, if I'm going to do it, you are too. So we started Australia's first systems-based pilot project. By the way, we did that for free for 6 months. We worked on a city street testing the concept of a circular economy. No one gave us permission. We didn't have experience. We just believed it was worth trying. So fast forward, you know, through this chapter here, you can see on the slide, our first client became one of Australia's largest companies. They're a multinational property developer, and I still work with that company today, and I adore them for giving us a chance. And then, you know, we in that first chapter, over that 2 years, we delivered Australia's first circular economy lab. We had 2 international projects, one in New Zealand. Rio Tinto engaged us to work on a remarkable technology that's actually potentially going to be deployed at Los Azules called Newton. And I'm very proud to have worked on that for several years. It's a low carbon copper technology, and the minerals are produced from often mine waste. Then if I wrap up into where we are today, we've delivered over 200 projects spanning from the world's largest mining companies, so like BHP, right the way through the world's largest beauty companies like L'Oreal. We've been invited to the United Nations General Assembly. I'm a TEDx speaker. I now sit on the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games Legacy Committee. And this all came from me being curious, believing we could do things differently, and really persevering, not giving up, and believing we need to solve the problem. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Wow. 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 It is marvelous to have Liam's spirit in this conference, bringing us together with ideas that are shaking me, moving me deeply, because it shows that where there's a will, there's a way, and there's an urgent need to do things faster and better. We cannot afford to spend 2 decades with platitudes, with symbolic pilot projects, and we have an opportunity to transform the world in an enormously beneficial way for everybody. And I'm so grateful to the people on this panel. With that, what can we do in a practical sense? We're bringing these ideas together. We bring the world of architecture with LED standards for a long time into the world of mining, but bringing just to the world of mining is not enough. As Felipe pointed out, mining, you can look at mining and you can look at the buildings in the mining project and the mining project per se, but mining also involves regional development, going beyond the project, and integrative thinking. So maybe Jason could put up one of his slide with the principles, and let's have a conversation around those. And what I like to conclude at the end, and we won't have enough time for all the ideas we want to put together, is to see what practical steps we will have. There will be a session at the end. I was sending emails this morning at the end of the forum in the afternoon, where we'll be discussing, so where do we take this? We've reached a lot of young people. These presentations have been brilliant beyond my wildest expectations. So let's, Jason, let's follow the discussion and see where we go for the remainder of the time.
So I'm happy to put this up and then start a dialogue. So this is in reference to the Los Azules project that Raziel and Rob and I are working on. And one of the things that we did from the very beginning was be very, very clear about what success looked like for the project, and to work together to create a series of aspirational and critical targets to meet. And this is some of the things that we're looking at in terms of creating a carbon positive copper mine, and obviously a safe and healthy mine, etc. And you can read through some of these things. But there's a whole list of criteria that we started with in order to shape the thinking of the development of the project. And that vision to create the world's greenest mine and the mission of what success looks like required us to develop a whole series of principles that would guide our thinking. So when we're thinking about how we're going to do every step of the mining process, we use this set of principles to ask ourselves questions and come up with the most innovative solutions. So there's a whole series of principles that we developed, and then within each principle, we're very clear about how we use the principle and how we practice this kind of thinking. And so I don't have the time to run through all of this, but this is the kind of applied thinking to a real project that's happening right now as we try to do the world's greenest mine.
Wonderful. That's exactly what I wanted you to present. So my question to Ashley, who is the youngest and probably smartest go-getter on our panel, how do we unicorn this? How do we get 1,000 Ashleys, 10,000 Ashleys, 100,000 Ashleys? There are people watching us around the world in many countries, and they're listening to us. And we want them involved. We want them to get involved and help move the world forward. What would normally in pre-COVID times would have taken 3 decades, can we do it in a decade? Can we start steering this huge ship with potential full benefits, because the world is beautiful? How do we start fixing things and moving it forward? Ashley.
I think it was a big question, so I'll do my best to answer it. But I think diversity of perspective, how do we get more diversity in every room? You know, not only the leadership rooms and, you know, but in different practices. I love what a lot of the panelists have shared about, you know, bringing in different skill sets. And I think, Hen, you were saying this, you know, for your work, you know, just looking at energy, all the respective disciplines you need. So how do we make room at the table where these decisions are being made, where these principles are being set? And particularly, how do we make room for young people? You know, I'm 34 right now, and it's taken a little while to break through what I would call that ceiling that felt above me. You know, how did I get at these tables? And it was really like hard work. It is actually being brave. These young people really need to back themselves into these rooms, you know, put your hand up, ask for help, ask to go out for a coffee with Rob McEwen, you know, like meet him, tell him your ideas, you know, connect, share your inspiration. We really need to get connected on our values, talk about them, create those spaces for them, and, you know, really bring young people in. I think it has a multiplier effect from there. You know, we really do need to value diversity of perspective, and that's across all boards in terms of diversity as well.
Felipe, you've worked on the confluence between mining, extractive industries, and the urban scenario. Where do you see things evolving in the next 10 years in that area? Where would the source of knowledge flow to or come from?
I think for me, there are 2 aspects that are extremely important. I think the first one has to do with something that I think Jason touched on, which is how do we actually think the different processes that make up the mining industry and the urban and environmental transformation that they cause simultaneously. And I actually think that one of the key aspects has to do with the fact that mining resources generally have a built-in expiration date, while the urbanization, the transformation that they cause, continues indefinitely. So how do you actually plan for that transition over time? For me, is critical. And this is the case, for example, of the nitrate extraction sites in Chile. A lot of that infrastructure then was translated into the extraction of copper. But an economy was never put in place for the cities that had already been formed around nitrate, right? So an endemic level of poverty came into those areas. So I think today it is critical that we not only think of mining as the only source of economic development, but simultaneously think, once that resource ends, how those societies can actually then take other economies. That would be one. The second one, very briefly, I think for me has to do with understanding the role of mining and extraction industries to municipalities. We no longer live in an era of a developmentalist state, but I think local municipalities have an incredible ability to partner with mining industries to be able to create projects that are greater than the sum of their parts.
Wonderful. Those are great insights. One phrase I like using is mining is an opportunity to convert natural capital into human capital. So properly, and your reference to urbanism and so on. I want to ask Rob. Rob, what is your vision for Sudbury, for example? Sudbury is an established mining town. It's transforming itself, is evolving into a greener town. The School of Architecture, which you've so generously endowed, is working there. Where do you see Sudbury with a confluence of mining and architecture, say 20 years from now? Where would you like it to be?
Well, I chose to support the school in Sudbury. They teach the program in French and English. They have First Nation elders providing philosophy, indigenous philosophy to the students. It's co-op, and it's looking at the resources of Northern Canada and seeing how they can best utilize those. I do think they are not aiming high enough. They should be looking in a broader context and saying there are climates, not just in Northern Canada, but in the Southern Hemisphere, below the seas and in space, that are where they could apply their ideas and innovation. Mining is a big part of Sudbury. It's why it's there. I think our government moved the tax department there. I don't really like that. Maybe we could come up with some realm to shut it down. But anyhow, that's beside the point. It's architecture. Well, at least for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was creating a little gem on the skyline. And then as this project that Jason spoke about and you're speaking about, Los Azules, is a very big opportunity. And I think the architectural students could start looking at that, but saying, what is the interior of those buildings look like? How do they make the worker feel? And then looking at the broader context of, well, what happens to the environment? How do those elements need to be into the design equation now? And that's certainly why I asked Jason to come in, because I just went, okay, let's reimagine this industry. What other benefits can we generate out of? Felipe said, well, maybe there's secondary and tertiary industries that come out, or activities. And so it's really just trying to think in a much larger scale. And I've often, there was one quote that I always, when you walk into our office, it's just on the wall, and it says, you know, the greatest danger we face is that we aim too low and we make it, rather than aiming too high and missing it. So what I see in Sudbury is just what I hope to see happens through the whole industry. And we're striving to embrace many of the concepts that weren't around 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago in the industry, and make it current and relevant, because it is producing metals that allow modern civilization to grow, to exist even.
Absolutely, and as we heard earlier in the forum, we need a lot more metals, and people are not really recognizing that, and we have a real challenge as to how we're going to get there. I would like to conclude by asking you to, for a minute or so, or 30 seconds or so, final words, and where do we take the LIAMforum from here? I'm hearing back that we will hold one next year. I think that is going to happen. But again, how do we unicorn this? How do we get lots and lots of young people saying, you know what, I really think that we can do something about it, and I want to be part of that, as opposed to I throw my hands in the air and I go back to distracting myself with something else. This is just too urgent for the whole world to ignore. So who wants to speak first?
May I jump in?
I volunteer, Raziel.
Please. Oh, okay. Rob spoke first, so Rob, then Hen.
All right. Well, I'm just building on Ashley's thought about giving a call, and Jason's thought about mentors and people who've done well in the industry. We did something on the internet at Goldcorp many years ago where we asked the world to tell us where we'd find the next 6 million ounces of gold in our mine. And we threw it up on the web and asked the world to take a look and tell us. And we offered $500,000 in prize money. 1,500 people from 50 countries took down our 400 megabyte file, and we ended up finding $3 billion worth of gold. But what came out of that was the biggest gold mine in the world sits between everybody's ears. And how do we connect those? So maybe in that trade that Ashley was talking about, that call, maybe we're asking for ideas as well to get that meeting and throw it out to all the mining schools in the world, all the architectural schools in the world, all the planning schools in the world, and say, who would you like to meet? And then approach those people and say, would you be prepared to meet these people? I'd certainly jump in there and say yes. But maybe you do it with all the heads of the mining companies. Maybe you do it with all the heads of the architectural firms and planners, and then bring in communities. So that's my thought.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I want to put forward the thought to call it the Liam Challenge, and I'll give the microphone to Hen.
So if I can, again, add something from my perspective. So I talked about this integrated process. And actually the first integrated process that I participated in was in Toronto, but ever since we developed it and we did processes like this with teams from Israel, from Germany, Africa, and other places. And I think you need to create an atmosphere that really allows people to collaborate. And what we tell people when we're at these charades is we expect you to talk outside of your discipline scope. And it seems like something unprofessional to say, but we got the most amazing feedbacks from people who were talking about different things that they were studied in university. So I think this is one idea that could work. And taking it back to the mining, which I know very little about the mining world, so it seems to me that there's no other alternative but to look at the biggest question, and that is, how can mining be last forever? How can mining be sustainable in a way that the resources will be never ending? And I think that's the question that the mining world needs to answer. And again, it's possible. I think it's possible. Can we mine carbon? can we mine concrete in a way that is constantly recycled, etc., etc. So can we mine resources from the earth that will continue to mine them forever? And I think to get these ideas, and we're not talking next year, we're talking perhaps in 10 years or 15 years. So I think this could connect to the LIAMforum, and perhaps the next forum could be sort of integrated roundtables, okay? So with students to really facilitate some ideas which may seem crazy in the beginning, and probably 80% of them will be, but we may end up what typically happens in our charades is that we end up with ideas that really stick to the ground, and that makes the whole effort worthwhile. So I suggest to consider maybe in the next forum to have these roundtables with actively with students from all around the world to create some collaborative thinking from different perspectives, to be crazy, to be less responsible for the ideas that we bring in. Later we can distill them, but we may end up with interesting ideas.
Thank you, Hen. Does Felipe or Ashley or Jason want to say something?
Yeah, maybe
we're okay.
Maybe I'll say super briefly. I think one thing that for me is key is innovative partnerships between industry and the academy. And I think that the more dialogues we can have that bring the two together, the more successful I think innovation will be.
Right. So with that, I think, Ashley, do you want to say the final word?
Very generous. I think just a big thank you to everyone for their inspiring remarks from my side and for allowing me to be part of this. And I think for young people, go out there and get it. You can be part of the change that we need.
Absolutely. So I want to thank everybody for your time. This has been wonderful. The forum really is astonishing. What the passion and the desire to help the next generation on board to help us make the world a better place is all over this forum, and I think it's brilliant. Thank you. I say goodbye, and I welcome the next panelists. Rob, Felipe, Ashley, Hen, and Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
And, wonderful.